Darius Webb was 41 years old when his wife whispered something that broke him in half. For 14 months, he had been her entire world. The man who declined a promotion to stay by her side, emptied their savings to cover what insurance wouldn't, and learned the name of every nurse on the oncology floor. He held her hand through every round of chemotherapy. He was there the night the doctor said clear. He was there when she cried. He was the reason she survived, and he believed, without a single doubt, that she knew that. That night, as Petra drifted to sleep in her hospital bed, still connected to monitors, still wearing the bracelet with her patient number, she reached for his hand in the dark, and she whispered, not to him, through him, the way people speak when they forget who is listening. What she said in that moment, 7 unguarded words, told Darius everything about the 14 months he had just lived through, everything about the man whose name she breathed like a reflex, and everything about what was coming next. She was already asleep again. He never moved, but something in him had already made a decision. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:14 a.m., not 5:15, not 5 tears, 5:14, because Petra's first medication needed to be taken at 5:45 on a stomach that had been awake for at least 30 minutes, and Darius had learned, through trial and error, and one very bad Tuesday in February, that the difference between 30 minutes and 15 was the difference between her keeping it down and not. He was out of bed before the second buzz. The kitchen light hummed on. He moved to the refrigerator and pulled it open. 8 containers, stacked in 2 columns on the second shelf, each one labeled with a strip of colored tape and a day of the week written in his careful block letters. Monday's container was blue. It held soft scrambled eggs, a small portion of oatmeal, and half a banana sliced thin, because Petra's appetite had been unreliable since the last round, and small portions went down easier than large ones. He had read that in an article. He had applied it without being asked. He set Monday's container on the counter and turned to his laptop, already open on the kitchen table from the night before. The spreadsheet filled the screen. It was not a simple thing. It had grown over 14 months into something closer to a document of a man's entire life. Columns for chemo appointments and follow-up labs, a tab for insurance appeals with their dates and statuses, and the specific names of the representatives he had spoken to. A separate section tracking out-of-pocket costs that had, as of last month, cleared $34,000. He had paused his 401k contributions in March of last year. The vacation fund, a joint savings account they had been adding to since year 2 of their marriage, earmarked loosely for Portugal someday, had been emptied in September to cover a round of treatments the insurance company had denied, and then, after his 4th appeal, partially reversed. He had written, "Will rebuild" in small letters next to that line. He had not deleted it. He scrolled to this week's appointments. Post-remission check. Lab work. A follow-up with Dr. Ashford this afternoon. He closed the laptop and began heating water for Petra's tea. The promotion had come around 18 months ago. Senior Director of Infrastructure Planning. A title that would have meant something. A significant salary bump. A corner office on the 14th floor. The kind of professional acknowledgement that a man like Darius accumulated slowly and spent carefully. His manager had presented it with the quiet enthusiasm of someone delivering good news they were proud of. The role required travel. 2 weeks out of every 6, sometimes more. Darius had thanked him sincerely, asked for 48 hours, and declined. His manager had nodded in the way people nod when they respect a choice they don't fully understand. He hadn't explained. There was nothing complicated to explain. Petra was in the middle of her 2nd round of chemotherapy, and there was no version of a corner office that was worth more than being in the right place. He had not told Petra about the promotion. Not then. Maybe someday. She had a laugh that started slow. That was the thing about it. It didn't arrive all at once. It built a little reluctantly, like she was trying to hold it back and couldn't quite manage it. And by the time it came out full, it had this quality of genuine surprise, like even she hadn't expected to find something that funny. He had loved that laugh since their second date. He still did. On the worst nights, the ones where the nausea wouldn't quit and the hours moved like wet concrete, she would get very quiet and very still. Her hand would find his in the dark, and she would say, in the thin, worn-out voice of a woman running on almost nothing, "I would have given up without you." He believed her every time. He had never once questioned whether he was supposed to be there. He simply was there, the way a wall is there, not performing anything, not waiting to be thanked, just present and load-bearing and steady. Dr. Ashford's office smelled like recycled air and the faint ghost of someone's lunch. The chairs were the padded kind with wooden armrests, arranged in a small cluster facing the desk. Darius had sat in this room 4 times before. He knew which chair had the wobbly left leg. He chose a different one today. Doctor? Ashford came in at 2:11 and sat across from them and opened the folder and looked at them both with the careful, composed expression of a woman who delivered hard news often enough that she had learned to carry good news gently too. She said the word at 2:17, clear. Petra made a sound Darius had never heard from her before. Not quite a cry. Something deeper than that. Something that had been held for a very long time. And finally didn't have to be any more. Her hand tightened around his, and her shoulders came forward, and she wept in the clean, exhausted way of someone who has been strong for too long. Darius held her hand. Steady. The same as always. They kept Petra overnight for observation. Standard procedure, doctor. Ashford said, nothing to worry about. Just protocol after a long treatment journey. Darius drove them to the hospital wing he already knew by heart, parked under the same light he always chose, and followed Petra's wheelchair through the doors. When she was settled, he pulled the chair close to her bed, the same chair, the same angle, and sat down. The hospital quieted slowly. It didn't go all at once. It tapered, the way a conversation does when people run out of things to say. The overhead announcements stopped. The footsteps in the hallway thinned out. The nurses changed shifts at 9, and after that the wing settled into the particular hush of a place where people were either sleeping or trying to. Petra had been drifting since 8:30. She was on her side, facing him, her breathing slow and even. The IV had been disconnected after dinner. Without the pole and the bags and the quiet mechanical beeping, she looked closer to herself than she had in months, her face relaxed in a way that illness had not allowed, the tension gone from around her eyes and her jaw. She looked, Darius thought, like a woman who had finally been given permission to rest. He sat in the chair beside her bed. Same chair, same angle. His elbows on his knees, his hands loosely folded, his eyes moving between Petra's face and the middle distance. The room held a faint antiseptic smell that he had long since stopped noticing. On the window ledge, the get-well cards from her co-workers and her book club were arranged in a loose row, some of them taped, some propped, one held in place by a small potted succulent someone had sent in week 3 of treatment. He was not tired. He thought he should have been. 14 months of this, and today of all days. But the tiredness hadn't arrived yet. Instead, there was something quieter in him, a low hum of a feeling he couldn't quite name. Not happiness, not relief. Something that hadn't figured out what shape it wanted to take yet. He watched her breathe. Around 9:30, she stirred. Not fully awake. She was still mostly under, her eyes closed, her body barely shifting. But her hand moved. It slid across the blanket toward the edge of the bed, slow and searching, the way a hand moves when the brain gives the instruction before it's fully back online. It found his. Her fingers closed around his hand by memory. Warm, familiar, the same grip that had found him in the dark on the worst nights of the past 14 months. He held it. She was quiet for a moment. Her breathing changed slightly, shallower, closer to the surface. Then her lips moved. Her voice was soft and loose, the words coming out unguarded, not quite shaped for anyone in particular. I kept thinking, if I didn't make it, Franklin would never forgive me for leaving him. Then her breathing deepened. Her hand went slack around his. She was gone again, back under, her face as still and peaceful as it had been before. Darius did not move. He sat with her hand in his, and the words hanging in the air above him, above the cards on the windowsill, above the thin hospital blanket, above 14 months of medication schedules and insurance appeals, and nights where he had held her hair back and told her she was going to be okay. He turned the words over. Franklin. He knew the name the way you know a word you've only seen written down once and never heard spoken aloud. It surfaced from somewhere far back, an early conversation, a name mentioned and moved past, the way you move past something when the moving past is the point. He could not place the moment exactly. What he could place was the feeling that had come with it, a faint, barely there thing he had never examined, because he had no reason to examine it. Until now, if I didn't make it, she had imagined not surviving. He had imagined it too. In the small hours, when she was asleep and he was not, he had stared at the ceiling and let himself feel the edges of it, briefly, carefully, then no further, because some fears are too heavy to carry out into the room where the person you love is trying to breathe. Franklin would never forgive me for leaving him. Not for dying, for leaving. Darius set her hand down gently on the blanket. He stood. He walked to the window and stood in front of it, his arms at his sides, and looked out at the parking lot 3 floors below. The amber light over the section where he always parked cast a long, clean circle on the asphalt. His car was exactly where he'd left it, everything exactly where he'd put it. He stood there for a long time. He did not cry. He did not pace. He did not reach for his phone or begin composing sentences in his head. He simply stood and looked out at the parking lot and let the words settle into him the way cold water settles, slowly, finding every space. He did not go back to sleep. At some point past midnight, he returned to the chair. He sat. He watched her breathe. The hours moved. By 6 in the morning, the wing was beginning to come back to life. A cart in the hallway, voices at the nurse's station, the slow brightening of the light through the window. Darius stood and stretched his back and picked up his jacket from the foot of the bed. He reached for his cup of water on the bedside table. That was when he saw her phone. It was lying on the table, screen side up, unlocked. The screen had been lit by a notification, a banking app he didn't recognize, the name of it unfamiliar. The notification was still visible. A balance update. He read the number. $214 to $400. He did not touch the phone. He reached into his jacket pocket for his own phone, opened the camera, and took one photograph. No flash, no sound. Quick and clean. He set his phone back in his pocket. He set her phone back exactly as it had been. Same angle, same position. He picked up his water cup and moved to the other side of the room. When Petra woke 20 minutes later, she stretched her arms above her head and smiled at the ceiling like a woman waking up in a place she was happy to be. Her eyes found him, and her smile widened. "Hey," she said. Her voice was morning soft. "Hey," he said. "Good morning." He handed her the coffee he'd gotten from the cart down the hall. The good kind, not the machine kind, in the paper cup with the cardboard sleeve. She wrapped both hands around it. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. She exhaled slowly, looked at the coffee, looked at him. "Better than I have in years," she said. He nodded once. His face was open and warm, and told her nothing at all. "Good," he said. "You deserve it." The drive home took 40 minutes. Darius made it in silence. No music, no radio, no podcasts about project management or African American history that he usually kept running in the background. Just the road and the sound of the engine and the city moving past his windows in the late morning light. Petra had been discharged into her sister Renee's care for the day. Her first post-remission morning, everyone agreed, should be soft and familiar. Renee had cried in the hallway and promised soup and old movies and no schedule whatsoever. Petra had hugged her husband at the hospital entrance, her chin on his shoulder, and said, "I'll be home by dinner. Thank you for everything." He had held her the right amount of time, said the right things, watched Renee's car pull out of the loop. Then he had walked to his car, sat down, and driven home without a single word to himself. The house was quiet in the particular way that houses are quiet when they've been mostly empty for a long time. 14 months of one person moving through them, carefully, efficiently, without much noise, leaves a certain kind of stillness behind. Darius set his keys on the counter. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, his jacket still on, and looked at the refrigerator. 3 color-coded meal prep containers on the top shelf. A 4th that had been Petra's for tomorrow. He had made them Sunday, the way he always did. He took off his jacket. He hung it on the back of the chair. He sat down at the kitchen table, placed both hands flat on the surface, and looked at the wood grain for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Aunt Celeste. She answered on the second ring. "Darius!" Her voice was the same as it always was. Direct, unhurried, a voice that had seen enough of life to know that the beginning of a phone call rarely contains the real reason for it. "Hey, Auntie. How's she doing?" "Good," he said. "They cleared her. She's with Renee today." "Good news," Celeste said. And then she waited. Because she was a woman who understood the difference between the thing people said first and the thing they had actually called to say. He told her. He did it the way he did most things, in order, without editorializing. The whisper in the hospital room, the name, what the words had been, precisely. Then the phone on the bedside table the next morning. The banking app he didn't recognize, the balance. Celeste listened to all of it without a single sound. When he finished, the line was quiet for 3 full seconds. "How long ago did she say the name?" Celeste asked. "Around 9:30, he said. "She was half asleep." "And the phone, you photographed it, you said." "Yes." 1 more second of silence. "Don't touch anything," she said. "Don't change anything. Don't move any money, don't close anything, don't say a word to her." "Not yet." A brief pause. "Call Kwame tonight." "Yeah," he said. "Darius, I'm here." "Call him tonight," she said again. Not because she thought he hadn't heard her. Because she wanted him to know that she knew what it cost to hold something like this and sit still with it. He said he would. They said goodbye. He set the phone down on the table. He sat there for a while after that, his hands flat on the wood. The refrigerator hum. The neighbor's dog barking twice at something and then going quiet. Then he got up, put the kettle on, and waited. Kwame arrived the following afternoon at 2 o'clock, while Petra was at her first post-remission follow-up appointment across town. He came through the front door with his laptop bag over one shoulder and his jaw set in a way that told Darius he had spent the previous 16 hours not sleeping well. He set his bag on the kitchen table, looked at his brother, and gave him a single firm grip on the shoulder. He didn't say, "How are you?" or "I can't believe this," or any of the other things that were true and useless. He pulled out a chair and sat down. Darius laid it out on the table. The photograph of the banking notification, printed on regular paper because he wanted something he could hold. His notes from the hospital. He had written them down that first morning, after Renee's car had driven away, in the small, precise handwriting he used when the thing he was recording mattered. The name, the account balance, the app he didn't recognize, the sequence of events, in order. Kwame read it. He went through it twice. His expression moved, disbelief first, quick and open, the way his face had always been more honest than his words. Then something hotter and darker beneath it, the color rising in his neck. Then, by the time he set the pages down, a stillness that Darius recognized because it looked exactly like his own. He opened his laptop without saying anything. Within 48 hours, Kwame had the answer. He turned the screen to face his brother and pointed. The account belonged to a joint holding. The second name on it was Franklin Osei. The funds were connected to a registered LLC, Holloway Osei Properties, incorporated 28 months ago under Petra's maiden name. The startup capital, Kwame explained, moving his finger across the screen slowly, traced in part to a series of draws on a home equity line of credit. Darius's home equity line of credit. His house. His name on the deed. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and picked up the legal pad that had been sitting at his elbow. He clicked his pen. At the top of the first blank page, he wrote 3 words. What I need. The alarm was set for 6:15. Darius was up at 5. He moved through the dark kitchen without turning on the overhead light. Just the small lamp above the stove, the one Petra always said was too dim for anything useful. He had always liked it. It lit exactly what needed lighting and left the rest alone. He made coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table with the legal pad and his pen and the quiet of a house where someone else was still sleeping upstairs. He could hear nothing from up there, just the settle of the walls and the refrigerator's low hum. He looked at the 3 words at the top of the page. What I need. He clicked his pen and began to write. Aunt Celeste made the call that same morning. She had worked alongside a forensic accountant named Bernard Holt for 11 years before she retired. A careful private man who took 4 clients at a time and kept his name out of courtrooms whenever possible. She did not tell Darius much about him. She said, "He's good. He's quiet. Send him what Kwame pulled." That was enough. Holt worked fast and said very little. Within 2 weeks, he sent a report to Darius's personal email, a new account Darius had opened from his work computer during a lunch break, attached to nothing and no one. Darius read it at the kitchen table after Petra had gone to bed. The number was $87,000. Not a guess, not an estimate. A documented total, broken into 3 channels, laid out in the report like a diagram of something that had been deliberately constructed. The first channel, the HELOC draws. Petra had pulled from the home equity line of credit in increments, never large enough to trigger a notification he would notice, always spaced far enough apart to look like ordinary household management. 8 draws over 14 months. She had access because they had both signed for it years ago, during a kitchen renovation, when the idea that she would one day use it for something else hadn't yet been something he needed to consider. The second channel, a joint savings account he barely remembered they still had. She had quietly redirected its monthly statements to her personal email address 18 months ago. Then she closed it. The balance at closing, just over $19,000, moved to her private account in a single transfer. He had never received a notification because by the time the account closed, it had already been removed from his email routing. The third channel was the one that sat with him longest. Insurance reimbursement checks. Several of the out-of-pocket medical costs Darius had paid, costs he had logged in the spreadsheet, costs he had fought the insurance company to recover, costs he had appealed twice with documentation he assembled himself on evenings after long shifts, had eventually been reimbursed. Those checks had come in Petra's name. she had deposited them into her private account. He had fought for that money. He had sat on hold for 40 minutes at a time and written letters and submitted forms and tracked every denial with the same focus he gave his most complicated work projects. And she had collected the results of that effort and moved it somewhere he would never think to look. He closed the laptop. He sat in the kitchen for a while. Then he went to bed. He did not change anything at home. He did not change anything at work. He brought Petra tea in the evenings. He asked about her physical therapy exercises. He said, "Good," and "That's great," and "I'm really glad to hear that," in exactly the right places. And none of it required much effort, because he had always been a man who could hold two things at once without letting either one show. Kwame called on a Thursday. His voice had the particular flatness it got when he was delivering something he'd spent time sitting with before saying it out loud. Holloway Osei Properties already owned 2 properties, both income-producing, both in good standing. But Franklin was moving. He was putting together a third deal, a larger one, a mixed-use building in a neighborhood that had been appreciating for 3 years. And he was actively marketing it to outside investors. He was using the LLC's existing assets as proof of concept. The pitch was simple and convincing. "Look what we've already built." Built, Darius thought, with my equity and her patience, and 26 months of my not looking up. Kwame named 3 of the outside investors Franklin was courting. One of them had a name Darius recognized immediately. A man who sat on an advisory panel connected to Darius's own firm. Another was a commercial developer whose company had done work in the same county where Darius's firm managed infrastructure contracts. Darius wrote both names down. He underlined them twice, pressing hard enough that the pen left grooves in the page beneath. He called Dr. Ashford's office on a Friday and asked if he could come in briefly to discuss Petra's aftercare needs. The receptionist said, of course. He had been a familiar face in that building for 14 months. He had learned all of their names. Dr. Ashford received him warmly. She was a composed woman, precise in the way that people are precise when their work requires them to deliver hard information without flinching. And she seemed genuinely pleased that the outcome had been good. They talked about Petra's follow-up schedule and the recommended monitoring intervals, and Darius asked the right questions and wrote a few things down in the small notebook he'd brought, because he had always come to these appointments prepared. Then, in the easy, unhurried tone of a woman tying off the last loose threads of a difficult case, Dr. Ashford mentioned it. "I did want to say, and I apologize if this should have come up earlier, we had a gentleman call the oncology desk during treatment. Twice, actually. He asked for updates on Petra's condition, said he was family." She folded her hands on the desk. "We assumed he was a cousin or an uncle. I hope that wasn't an overreach on our part." Darius looked at her steadily. "Did he give a name?" "Franklin," she said. "That was all he gave us." Darius nodded slowly. He kept his face the way he had learned to keep it, open, warm, giving nothing away. "There's nothing to apologize for," he said. "You were looking after her. That's all any of us were trying to do." He thanked Dr. Ashford for her time. He thanked the receptionist at the front desk by name. He walked to his car, sat down, and drove home at exactly the speed limit. When he got to the kitchen table, he opened the folder. He found the last page with writing on it. He uncapped his pen. He wrote the name. He wrote twice. He wrote identified as family. Then he set the pen down flat across the page. Petra came home on a Saturday. She moved through the front door with her overnight bag on her shoulder and stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at everything the way you look at a room you thought you might never see again. Then she exhaled, long and slow, and smiled the kind of smile that fills a face completely. "It looks the same," she said. "It is the same," Darius said. She walked through the living room and trailed her fingers along the back of the couch. She went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator and laughed softly at something inside it. She moved from room to room like a woman taking inventory of something she had nearly lost. Darius stood in the hallway and watched her. He kept his hands in his pockets. The energy she brought back with her was not the energy of rest. It was something brighter and more restless than that. The particular kind that lives in people who have decided that surviving something means accelerating out the other side of it. She reorganized the pantry on Sunday. She made calls on Monday. She signed up for a yoga class she had always meant to take and booked a haircut for the following week. Darius watched all of it and said the right things. "Good for you. You deserve this. You're doing great." It was Thursday evening when she raised it. They were at the kitchen table after dinner, the remains of the meal still between them, the overhead light low the way they had always kept it. Petra had her hands wrapped around her wine glass, and the expression she wore when she had been thinking about something for long enough that she had already decided how the conversation would go. "I've been thinking," she said, "about our finances." Darius looked up from his plate. "What about them?" "Just where we are, after everything." She turned the glass slowly in her hands. "I think the illness gave me a kind of clarity. Like, why are we in this house? It's so much space. And the maintenance alone, I just think there might be something freeing about simplifying, selling, splitting the equity, starting fresh somewhere smaller, somewhere that's actually us right now, not us from 7 years ago." She said it the way she said most things, warmly, with a kind of forward-leaning reasonableness that made the idea sound obvious, like she was simply saying out loud what any sensible person would have already been thinking. Darius nodded. He set his fork down. "That's worth thinking about," he said. "I think it really is. I just wonder if we should wait until after the 60-day checkup before we make any big moves. We've both been through a lot. I don't want us making major decisions while everything's still fresh." He paused. "Does that make sense?" Petra considered this. Then she smiled and reached across the table and put her hand over his. "That's very you," she said. "Always thinking it through. Just want to do it right," he said. He turned his hand over and held hers for a moment. Then he squeezed it gently and stood to clear the plates. What Petra did not know, what she had no reason to know, because nothing in his voice or his face or the steadiness of his movements had given her any reason to look, was that Darius had spent the previous 2 weeks doing the very thing she was hoping to prompt. He had met with a real estate attorney on a Tuesday lunch break. He knew the precise market value of the house, the current balance on the HELOC, and exactly what the equity position looked like when the forensic accountant's documented figures were laid against it. He had met with a divorce attorney on a Thursday. He knew his legal standing, his options, and what documentation he had available to support each one. And 9 days ago, quietly, without ceremony, he had changed his direct deposit to a new account opened in his name only. Petra had no knowledge of it, no access to it, no connection to it at all. He washed the dinner dishes and listened to her moving around upstairs and said nothing. He drove to Aunt Celeste's that evening after Petra had gone up to read. Celeste had made food without being asked, which was the way she always did things. A real meal, the kind that required the table to be set properly. She put a plate in front of him and sat across from him and waited, the way she always waited, with the patience of a woman who understood that the thing a person needs to say will come when it comes. He got through most of the plate before he said it. "I keep going back to the 2 a.m. nights." His voice was even, but something underneath it was not. "When she was sick. The worst ones. I'd be holding her, and she was so scared. And I believed it. Everything I was doing. I believed I was exactly where I was supposed to be." Celeste was quiet. "I don't know how to hold that," he said. "That it was real for me and it was, whatever it was for her, at the same time." Celeste let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, That man in that hospital room is the realest thing in this whole story. Don't let what she did make you question him." Darius looked at her. "She didn't make you love her," Celeste said. "You brought that yourself. It was yours." He didn't say anything. He looked down at his plate. He finished eating. He helped her clear the table. He drove home in the dark with the window down and the late air moving through the car. And when he got home, he went upstairs and lay down and closed his eyes. He slept well for the first time in weeks. The call came on a Tuesday. Darius was at his desk reviewing project files, a drainage infrastructure report, redlined in 3 places, a deadline at the end of the week. His coffee had gone cold. The office around him had the low, steady hum of people working through the middle of an afternoon. Normal. Unremarkable. His cell phone lit up on the desk beside his keyboard. An unfamiliar number. Local area code. He looked at it for 1 ring. Then he picked it up. "This is Darius." A pause. The small, particular silence of someone who has rehearsed the first sentence and is now actually saying it. "Hi, my name is Tanya Bridges. We've never met. I know Petra through work. Through old work." Another pause. "I heard through someone we both know that you might be going through something. And I've been trying to decide whether to call for a long time. I'm sorry it took me this long." Darius set down his pen. He leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening," he said. Tanya's voice was careful, not dramatic, not the voice of someone who wanted to be in the middle of this. It was the voice of someone who had something sitting on her chest and had finally decided the weight of carrying it was worse than the discomfort of putting it down. She told him about the party, 14 months ago, a rooftop birthday celebration for a man named Franklin Osei. Tanya had been invited through her own network. She moved in adjacent circles, knew some of the same people. It was a warm evening, the kind of party where everyone is well-dressed, and the city looks good from above. Petra was there. She wasn't— "I want to be clear about this," Tanya said. "She wasn't diminished. She wasn't hiding. I knew she was in treatment. Our mutual contacts had talked about it, how hard it was, how her husband was managing everything. A beat. She looked beautiful. She was laughing. She was standing next to Franklin in this way that, you just know. When 2 people have stopped pretending, you can just tell." Darius was quiet. He was looking at the wall in front of his desk. Not really seeing it. "I knew she was married," Tanya said. "I knew what her husband was doing at home while she was at that party. I left early. I felt sick the whole drive back." Her voice thinned slightly. "I kept waiting for it to end. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place, that maybe I'd misread it, that maybe they were just friends." She stopped. "I didn't misread it." "No," Darius said. "You didn't. I should have called you a year ago. I know that. I'm sorry." "I'm genuinely sorry." There was nothing performed in her apology. It was a plain thing, offered by a plain person who had done the wrong calculation for too long and knew it. Darius let a moment pass. "Tanya," he said, "you did the right thing. It matters that you called. She stopped herself. "I hope you're okay. I'm getting there," he said. After he hung up, he sat, without moving for a while. Around him, the office continued its low hum. Someone laughed in the hallway. A printer ran somewhere down the corridor. The world kept its pace. He thought about the second round of chemo. He could place it exactly. He had the schedule memorized. Still did. The way you memorize a map of a place you never wanted to visit. That cycle had been one of the harder ones. Petra had been sick for several days coming out of it. He remembered a specific afternoon where she had barely been able to keep water down, and he had sat on the bathroom floor with her for 2 hours because she didn't want him to leave. He had not left. She had gone to a rooftop party. He didn't let himself stay in that place for long. He had learned, over the past few weeks, that the way through was never down, never into the feeling, and through the bottom of it. The way through was forward, sequential, one thing after the next. He reached into his desk drawer and took out the folder. He opened it to the last page, where the notes ran in his handwriting, clean lines, dates, figures, names. He picked up his pen. He wrote Tanya's name. He wrote the date of the party, the location, the details she had given him. He wrote, Petra present, between treatment cycles, standing with Franklin Osei. T. Bridges, direct witness, credible, disinterested. He paused, then he wrote one more line. She was there. He knew. Both of them chose it. He looked at what he'd written. Then he drew a slow, even line under it. He closed the folder. He was ready. The call to his attorney lasted 11 minutes. Darius made it from his car, parked in the lot behind his office building, before the workday started. The morning was gray and cool, the kind of sky that promises nothing in either direction. Prepare the filing, he told Sandra Okafor. Everything we discussed, but don't serve it yet. Understood, Sandra said. I'll have it ready by end of day Thursday. You'll review before anything moves. Good. That was all. He ended the call, sat for a moment with the engine off, then went inside and put in a full day's work. Thursday evening, he drove to Aunt Celeste's house. Kwame was already there when he arrived. His brother's truck was parked out front, and through the front window, Darius could see the blue-white glow of a laptop screen. He stood on the porch for a second, just a second, feeling the specific weight of what was about to happen. Then, he opened the door. Celeste's kitchen smelled like coffee and something savory on low heat. She had set the table the way she always set it when something important was going to happen. Cleared completely. A single lamp on. Enough space for papers. She had done this his whole life. She did it now, without anyone asking. Darius set the folder on the table. Kwame turned his laptop to face the room. They went through everything once, in order, from the beginning. Sandra had sent over the draft filing that afternoon. Darius had read it twice in his car before coming inside. He had read it the way he read every contract, beginning to end, once for comprehension, once for gaps. There were no gaps. The filing named the LLC. It named the joint account. It named the HELOC draws, their dates, their amounts. The forensic accountant's report was attached as an exhibit, 41 pages, clean and precise as a surgical report. Numbers, timelines, account trails, signatures. Kwame walked them through the investor piece. Franklin's third deal, he said, pulling up a document on his screen. One of the outside investors, a man named Gerald Pruitt. His investment agreement has a standard disclosure clause. Kwame read it aloud, flat and factual. The language was dense, but the meaning was simple. If active litigation naming the LLC or its principals arose during the investment period, Franklin was required to notify Pruitt in writing within 15 business days. Pruitt retained the right to withdraw his capital pending resolution. Celeste set her coffee cup down. How much? $340,000, Kwame said. The room was quiet for a moment. I didn't put that clause there, Darius said. Not as a defense, as a statement of fact. No, Kwame said. Franklin did, or his attorney did. Standard language. He looked at his brother. The filing triggers it automatically. Darius doesn't have to make a single phone call. Celeste looked at Darius. You read the landscape. I read the landscape, he said. He gathered the papers back into the folder, squared the edges, and sat with it in front of him. Celeste refilled all 3 cups. Outside, the neighborhood was going quiet in the way of Thursday evenings. A dog barking somewhere, a car passing, the ordinary sounds of people finishing their ordinary days. He called Petra's parents the following morning. Her father, Ronald, answered on the second ring. Darius had known Ronald Holloway for 9 years. He was a careful man, unhurried in his speech, conservative in his judgments, the kind of father who showed love through reliability rather than warmth. They had always respected each other in the specific, functional way of men who communicate mostly through consistency. Darius told him everything. He did not editorialize. He did not raise his voice. He moved through the information the way he moved through any briefing, clearly, sequentially, with supporting detail available if wanted. The LLC, the joint account, the HELOC, the 2 years, the rooftop party. Franklin calling the oncology desk while Darius sat in the chair. Ronald did not speak for a long time. Darius let the silence sit. He did not fill it. When Ronald finally spoke, his voice was low and measured in the way of a man absorbing something he could not put back. "Darius," he said, and then nothing else for another moment. "I'm not asking you to choose a side," Darius said. "I'm asking you to know the truth before she gives you her version of it." A long breath on the other end of the line. "I appreciate you calling me directly. You deserved that." The papers were served the following morning at 9:47. Darius was at the office. He was mid-presentation. A quarterly infrastructure review, 8 people in the conference room, a projector running site photographs from a drainage project in the 3rd Ward. His phone, face up on the table beside his notes, buzzed once, then again. 3 more times, in quick succession. A 6th. He looked at it once. Petra's name on the screen, over and over. He turned the phone face down on the table. "Next slide," he said. He finished the presentation. He answered questions afterward. He shook hands, gathered his notes, and walked back to his desk. That evening, Petra called twice more. He watched her name light up the screen both times. He let it ring through. He went to the kitchen. He made dinner. Rice, a simple stew, something he had cooked 100 times. He ate slowly, at the table, without the television on. He washed his plate. He read for an hour. He went to bed at his regular time. Petra called again on Saturday morning. Darius answered this time. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was controlled, carefully controlled, the way a person sounds when they have been rehearsing since Thursday. "We do," Darius said. "Then come home, or meet me somewhere." "Celeste's house," he said. "Sunday at 2. A pause, small, but there. "Why there?" "Those are my terms." Another pause, then, "Fine." He called Celeste after he hung up. She listened, said, "I'll have coffee." And that was the end of the conversation. Petra arrived 4 minutes early. Darius watched her pull up from Celeste's front window. She sat in the car for a moment before getting out, just long enough to confirm that she was steadying herself, arranging her face into something that would read as reasonable. She was dressed simply. Neat. She looked like a woman who had thought carefully about how she wanted to look. She knocked, which she had never done before. Celeste opened the door without a word and stepped aside. Petra came into the kitchen and looked at the table, the cleared surface, the lamp, the folder sitting squarely in front of Darius's chair, the 3 seats arranged with equal spacing. Whatever she had expected the room to feel like, it did not feel like that. "Celeste," she said, "you look well." Celeste said nothing. She poured herself a cup of coffee and took the chair to Darius's left. Petra sat down across from him. For a moment, no one spoke. Darius looked at her steadily. He had no particular expression on his face. Not anger, not coldness, just attention. The same attention he had given her for 9 years. Petra spoke first. "I know how this looks," she said. Her voice was warm, careful, pitched at the register of a woman being unfairly misread. "But you have to understand, that money was practically mine too. I had access to those accounts. I had every right." "Okay," Darius said. She blinked. "Okay?" He did not explain the word. He simply waited. She shifted slightly in her chair. "And I want to say something else." She folded her hands on the table. "You were always more invested in this marriage than I was, and I think on some level you knew that. And it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair for either of us to let you carry something I couldn't match. I should have said something sooner. That's on me. Okay, Darius said again. The word landed the same way the second time. Flat. Final. Not agreement. Something else entirely. Like a door being closed quietly in a room she thought she could walk through. She looked at him for a moment. Then she leaned forward slightly, and her voice dropped, and she reached for the one thing she had been holding in reserve. Darius, his name in her mouth, gentle. The cancer changed me. I was terrified. I was not myself for a very long time, and the choices I made during that time, I was not thinking clearly. I was not the person I normally am. Surely you can understand that. Darius looked at her for one long, quiet moment. Then he opened the folder. The joint account, he said. Opened 31 months ago. Current balance at time of discovery, $214,400. Account holder, Petra Holloway Webb and Franklin Osei. Darius, I'll take questions at the end. He did not say it harshly. He said it the way he ran a meeting, matter-of-factly, with the particular authority of a man who knows the room and has already accounted for every objection. He kept going. The HELOC draws, dates, amounts, signatures. Her signature specifically on a joint account Darius had trusted her to manage. $87,000, moved over 26 months in increments small enough not to trigger a second look. The LLC, Holloway Osei Properties. Her maiden name, his capital, incorporated 28 months ago. The 2 rental units currently generating income. Properties bought with equity drawn from the home Darius had paid into for 9 years. The timeline, month by month, beginning 5 months before her diagnosis. The account, the LLC, the transfers, all of it predating her first oncology appointment by nearly half a year. Tanya Bridges, a rooftop party, 14 months ago. The second chemo cycle. Petra, dressed beautifully, standing close to Franklin in the specific way of people who had stopped pretending. While Darius was home, managing her medication schedule, refilling her prescriptions, sitting in the chair. Franklin's calls to the oncology desk. 2 of them. A man identifying himself as family, requesting updates on Petra's condition. The same weeks Darius had learned the names of every nurse on the floor. Petra's hands, on the table, had gone very still. When Darius closed the folder, the kitchen was completely quiet. Petra looked at Celeste. It was a quick look, almost involuntary, the kind of glance a person gives when they are searching for something soft to land on. Celeste looked back at her. No expression, no apology. The steady, unmovable gaze of a woman who had seen enough and remembered all of it. Petra looked back at Darius. Something in her face was different now. The careful arrangement had come apart, very slightly, at the edges. I was going to tell you, she said, when the time was right. Darius looked at her. No, you weren't. He stood up. He picked up the folder. He placed the copies, her copies, Sandra had prepared them specifically, on the table in front of her, squared neatly, without ceremony. You used the worst thing that ever happened to you as the one reason I would never suspect you. He said it evenly, no heat in it, just the plain, permanent shape of the truth. And I want you to know you were right. I never suspected you, not once. He walked out of the kitchen, past Celeste, who did not look up. He got into his car. He drove home in silence. Darius was at his desk by 8:15 the next morning. He had slept 7 hours. He had made coffee, eaten breakfast, and driven to work the same way he always did. The same route, the same parking spot, the same nod to the security guard whose name was Terrence and who always asked about the weather like it was a topic with new information. The people who knew him best would have said he seemed normal. They would have been right. The storm had already passed through him months ago when he sat at a hospital window in the middle of the night and first turned the words over in the dark. Everything since then had been clean up. The kind of cleanup a methodical man does without drama. He opened his project files, he answered 3 emails. He went to the 10 o'clock status meeting and left it having resolved 2 scheduling conflicts that had been stalled for a week. His phone, on silent, accumulated no messages he felt urgency about. The forensic accountant's report entered the divorce record on a Wednesday. Darius's attorney, a compact, precise woman named Sandra Okonkwo, who communicated exclusively in complete sentences and had never once told him what he wanted to hear, instead of what was true, argued the case with the kind of quiet ferocity that doesn't perform itself. She didn't need to raise her voice. The documentation spoke at a volume that didn't require assistance. The court agreed to full recovery of the misappropriated HELOC funds with interest, $87,000, plus the accumulated cost of 26 months of compounding. The equity split was adjusted to reflect the documented financial misconduct. The LLC, Holloway Osei Properties, built in Petra's maiden name on Darius's foundation, saw its rental assets pulled into the marital estate calculation. The exit Petra had been engineering for over 2 years, the one she had built carefully and patiently while her husband refilled her prescriptions and held her hand through the worst nights of her life, did not survive contact with Sandra Okonkwo and a forensic accountant's report. She did not walk away with what she had planned to walk away with, not even close. Franklin's consequences arrived on their own schedule, through channels Darius had never needed to touch directly. The divorce filing became a matter of public record on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, the investor with the disclosure clause in his agreement had been formally notified through standard legal process. His name was Gerald Park, and he had placed $340,000 into Franklin's pending third property deal based on what he understood to be a clean, credible operating history. He exercised his right to withdraw. All of it. The deal did not close. The 2 remaining investors, now aware of the active litigation and its details, moved quickly. They commissioned independent due diligence, the kind that gets thorough when money is at stake and trust has already flinched. What that review surfaced was not criminal. It was simply irregular. The LLC's startup capital, partially traceable to a home equity line drawn on a marital asset without full spousal disclosure, was the kind of irregularity that serious investors with serious money do not want attached to their portfolios. One reduced his exposure by half and went quiet. One withdrew entirely. Franklin was not arrested. He was not sued into bankruptcy. Nothing dramatic happened to him, and from the outside it might have looked, briefly, like a man absorbing a rough quarter and regrouping. But the rooms where Franklin's reputation had been load-bearing were small rooms, professional ones, the kind where information moved through handshakes and quiet conversations at industry dinners, where a man's name arrived before he did, and what it arrived with mattered more than anything he could say once he got there. His name now arrived with a qualifier: good developer, smart deals. But there was that situation with the Webb divorce, messy business, the LLC, the HELOC, the whole thing. You didn't hear about that? Deals that would have come to him were routed elsewhere, not loudly, not with announcement, just elsewhere. The way water finds a different path when one channel becomes unreliable. He had built a reputation over years on the image of a reliable, ethical operator. He had treated that image as impervious because it had never been genuinely tested. He had looked at Darius Webb and seen a soft man, a devoted man, a man too busy loving his wife to ever look up. He had been wrong about all 3. Petra's parents did not perform the rescue she expected. Her mother called her on a Sunday. The conversation was not long, and it was not cruel, but it was honest in the specific way that only a parent can be honest, without armor, without the softening that strangers provide each other. "I won't tell people it was mutual," her mother said. "I won't say you grew apart. I won't do that to him." Petra said nothing for a moment. "He called us himself," her mother continued. He sat on the phone with your father, and he told us the truth, and he didn't ask us for a single thing except to know it. You understand what I'm telling you? The social scaffolding, the clean narrative, the mutual drift, the version of the story where no one was to blame, had been quietly, permanently removed. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in late October. Darius read through the final documents the night before, the way he read all documents, fully, without rushing, noting every figure and confirming every number against the records he kept. Everything was correct. Everything was accounted for. He signed the last page in Sandra Okonkwo's office at 11 in the morning. Sandra handed him the completed copy with a single nod, the nod of a professional who respected what she had watched a client do and do well. He thanked her. He meant it. He walked out of the building into afternoon sunlight. 18 months later, Darius Webb laced up his running shoes in the entryway of a house that was entirely his. Not large, not trying to be. A 3-bedroom craftsman on a quiet street in a neighborhood where the trees were old enough to make real shade, and the neighbors waved from their driveways without needing to know your business. Clean lines, good bones, his name alone on the deed. He had chosen it because it had no history attached to anything in it. Every corner was a corner he had turned by himself. Every room held exactly what he had put there, and nothing else. He pulled the laces tight, stood up, and stepped outside into the cool of a Saturday morning. He ran the same 4-mile loop he had been running since he moved in. Not because he lacked creativity, because he liked knowing the ground under his feet. He liked the cracked sidewalk square at the corner of Alden and Birch that he had memorized by the 3rd week. He liked the dog behind the green fence on Hollowell who barked every single time, outraged, as if Darius had never once passed before. He ran without headphones. He let his mind do what it wanted. Mostly it wanted nothing. That was new. A year ago, even 6 months ago, the quiet had still carried an undercurrent, a low hum of everything he had processed and packed away. Now, the quiet was just quiet. The good kind, the kind you earn. He had accepted the promotion 11 months ago. A different version of it had come back around, the way things sometimes do when a man stops folding himself into shapes that don't fit him. Senior program director. He managed a large infrastructure project now, a bridge rehabilitation contract across 3 counties, with a team of 14 that had learned, fairly quickly, that their director was the kind of man who remembered what he was told, delivered what he promised, and did not raise his voice because he never needed to. They respected him in the straightforward way of people who recognize competence without needing to perform the recognition. He had re-enrolled in the MBA program the previous January and finished it on a Thursday evening in April. He drove home after the last session, made himself a decent plate of pasta, and watched 30 minutes of television before going to bed. No ceremony. The degree arrived in the mail 2 weeks later, and he put it in a frame on the wall of his home office, not because he needed anyone to see it, but because he had earned it twice, and that deserved to be on a wall. Saturday afternoons, when the project load allowed, Kwame came over. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes Darius cooked. He had gotten genuinely good at it over the last year, the kind of good that comes from paying attention and caring about the outcome. He would text Kwame around noon, "Jerk chicken or the short ribs?" And Kwame would reply inside of 45 seconds every time, as if he had been waiting by his phone. They ate at the kitchen table and talked about the project, about Kwame's firm, about basketball and whatever else. Easy conversation. The kind you can only have with someone who was there for the hard part and doesn't need to keep referencing it to know it happened. Aunt Celeste came on Sundays, when the weather was right. She brought nothing and contributed everything, the way she always had. Her presence in a room doing the specific work that only her presence could do. These were the people who made up the essential architecture of his days now. Not a network, Not a performance of community. Just the actual ones. The people who showed up, who told him the truth, who handed him a plate without making a production of it. He was not lonely. He had been surprised to discover that. He finished the 4-mile loop and came back to the front door breathing steadily, the good tired in his legs. He stood on the porch for a moment and looked at the street, the trees, the morning light coming through them at that particular angle that only happened in autumn, when the leaves had started to turn and the air had thinned into something clean and cool. A kid on a bicycle at the far end of the block, wobbling and correcting, wobbling and correcting. He went inside. He showered. He made breakfast. He was not performing any of this. He was not narrating it to himself to make it feel real. He was simply a man living his life, the life on the other side of the fire, which turned out to be better than the one before it, not because of what she had done, because of every choice he had made in response. That distinction mattered to him. He had thought about it enough to be certain. The following afternoon, a Sunday in late summer, he sat on Celeste's porch in the low gold light with a glass of iced tea sweating in his hand. She came out with her own glass and settled into the chair beside him. They sat for a while without talking. The neighborhood was quiet in the particular way of Sunday afternoons, when even the noise took a break. After a while, Celeste looked at him. "How are you?" she asked. Not as a greeting, as a real question, delivered by a woman who wanted a real answer. Darius held it for a moment. He looked out at the yard, the old oak at the edge of the property, the light moving through it slowly. "I'm the same man I was in that hospital room," he said, "except now I know what I'm worth." Celeste nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she handed him a plate. Darius accepted it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.